Hello, guys. Welcome to this new edition of Mind Makers. This is Adit Kapadia, and together with me is author, historian, columnist, author of various books, and most recently the host of the Mauryalok series on YouTube, Sumedha Verma Oja. Hi, Sumedha ji.
Namaste. Namaste to
Welcome
you
to the
and to
podcast.
everyone who's doing this. Thank you for calling the podcast.
This is only what 2 years in the making when we first started talking about the podcast.
Yes, very quick. Very
Very
quick
quick.
turnover time, I'll say.
I know. I guilty as charged. But the what was planned in 2018 must come to fruition in 2020, I guess, is the... See, 2020, why do we say it's the year of impossibilities, right? It's the year of possibilities. This happened. So,
True.
so
At least
we are joining at this weird sort of time, chai time for both me and Sumedha ji. She, of course, she's joining in the afternoon. I'm in the morning. She's joining from an undisclosed location in Europe.
oh my God. Oh my God. That makes me sound so shady, Adit.
And
But if
I
I
was,
it sounds even worse.
I was
What with pranks, etc.
I was trying to build up the intrigue, but you've joined in with a Indian sari and your collection of Indian books, and I look like a complete sort of misfit. So as goes the theme of the podcast, I will just I'll happily play the second fiddle with Sumedha ji. But I'll tell you this, guys. This is going to be a very interesting discussion because we're going to talk about Indian history. We're going to talk about saving history from historians and historiographers. And why I say that is what we'll come to. We'll talk a little bit about the Mauryans because Sumedha ji is doing this fantastic web series on the Mauryans, and we'll also talk about contemporary history. And in the weeks to come and in the months to come, this is probably going to be a 5 or a 6-part series. We haven't decided how many parts, but basically both of us, Sumedha ji and I, will come. We'll talk about basically Indian history. So, and it's going to be like a series of
whatever the viewers want to hear about, we can get
absolutely
some inputs from the people who are listening to us, and we can talk about the things that concern them.
Absolutely, and I would like to say not just viewers, even listeners, because a lot of our listenership is on SoundCloud. So
listeners also, sorry.
So people who are on SoundCloud, and I know there is a lot of you guys who listen to us on SoundCloud. If you want to see the podcast, which is sort of an irony because podcast is audio, but we are also doing video podcasts. Please check out our YouTube page, Mind Makers on YouTube. That's where this is uploaded. So without further ado, and without boring you guys further, let me introduce you to the more interesting person on this panel. Hi Sumedha. Let's start with the history of the Mauryans. Right, this was a very interesting week, and the reason we were discussing offline, the last week for the Jains was a week of Paryushan and Samvatsari, which is a very holy thing for Jains. And I've tweeted about it and stuff. And the reason I bring it up was because Chandragupta Maurya died as a Jain, and with one of the oldest, and by many scholars say the last guru of the undivided Jain Samaj, after whom the Shvetambaras and Digambaras say, Bhadrabhahu Swami, a king from Patna, Pataliputra, right, the heart of the Mauryan Empire, dies with the Jain Guru Bhadrabhahu Swami in Shravan Belagol right now, which in Karnataka, which is a huge site, where every 12 years the huge Mahamastak Abhishek takes place of Bahubali Swami. Explain to us, leaders, right, why this is significant, why the Mauryan Empire is such a significant sort of chapter in the history of Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism, and thereby the history of India.
That's a wonderful, excellent question, Adit. And I have been engaging with Indian history for a very long time. So I could have chosen any period. The whole thing was open before me. I could have chosen the Saraswati Sindhu civilization, or I could have chosen the Satavahanas or the Guptas. Why the Mauryans? And why do I concentrate so much on them that I'm making an in-depth series which will tell you everything about them? The reason is that the Mauryans were the first empire, the first historical empire which unified politically the subcontinent. So Chandragupta Maurya and Chanakya, his guru, were the two people who politically unified this subcontinent. Now we cannot say that our history does not go before the Mauryans. Of course it does. Of course there is a huge history of thousands of years. But what is special about the Mauryans is that they are the first ancient reflection of what we are today. So the Mauryans and us moderns are in a sense parallel in so many significant ways that it becomes imperative to study them. Now we could, of course, study Kurukshetra, for example, or we could look at Bharat. But would we find the kind of parallels that we find with modern India? Probably, possibly, most probably not. So that is why I feel that the Mauryans are important. And look at modern India. It has certain symbols, the lion capital, the peacock, the Ashok Chakra. Where have all these come from? And why have all those come from the Mauryans? That is the important thing to note. And we are not the only ones who want to associate ourselves with the Mauryans. Yeah. It's also the Guptas wanted to associate themselves with the Mauryans. So what did they call themselves? Two of them, Chandragupta, Vikramaditya. So Chandragupta I and Chandragupta II. Even a medieval Muslim ruler, Firoz Shah Tughlaq, he also plucked up two of Ashokan pillars and brought them to his own capital and started writing on them. Why? Because he wanted to partake of that imperialism of the Mauryans. And they live in our collective memory as a symbol of political unification, of royalty, of power, of governance in this subcontinent. Now, this is as far as politics goes. Of course, it's very important that Chanakya, the guru of Chandragupta, wrote the Arthashastra, which is the compendium for politics, for economics, for society, and for almost everything that you think of.
It's like an encyclopedia. The fantastic part about that is that the Arthashastra, se bhi zyada popular, has become the term Chanakyan or Chanakyaniti or Chanakya. So more than just his work, he himself, his personality is viewed as sort of a metaphor for great political strategy.
Yes, Adit, but as an academic or a historian, I have a bit of a cavil over here because sometimes I feel that Chanakya, the personality, overshadows Arthashastra, the book. And Arthashastra, the book, is well worth reading. And my episode 3 of Maurya Lok, I have in fact done it on Chanakya and Arthashastra, and I have concentrated more on the book. The book will astonish you because the book it's that expression of his intellect which gave Chanakya the role position and the whole kind of huge respect that he garners from all of us. But I didn't answer that question of yours about Jainism, Buddhism, and Hinduism. Yeah. So you see the Mauryan emperors and even the emperors before them, even if you take the Nandas, were a very eclectic group in terms of the kind of beliefs they followed. Correct. Also, this hard division between this is Hindu, this is Jain, this is Buddhism, it did not operate then, and I am not sure whether it operates now. You would be in a better position to tell me. I have never felt that there is a hard division between these Indic religions, and it was definitely not there during the time of the Mauryans.
It is truly, each of them is a way of life. You don't convert to go into XYZ or ABC, right? It's what you choose to follow. It's the principles. There have been families who have, the Gupta family themselves. Chandragupta Maurya was a Jain. Bimbisara, his son, was an Ajivika all his life. And Ashoka, his grandson, embraced Buddhism in the last of the... ye ek hi family hai. So it was possible.
And in spite of the fact that they believed and embraced these beliefs, it did not mean that they in any way ignored, denigrated, or in any way against the other.
And this did not impact in their governance, right? There is a very important thing. Their religion was post their governance phase or during their governance phase in their, sort of their rituals or kriya they did or something. But that wasn't the most
defining. I would like to emphasize that the roots of all these are the same. And the roots come from this land. The ideas of these three big ways of looking at life and of leading your life, they do not clash with each other. Yeah. They are kind of, they are branches of the same tree. Yes. And as branches of the same tree, the same kind of ideas are found in all these three different ways of living life. Now you look at the inscriptions of Ashok. So it is very widely said by our esteemed historians, our eminent historians, that it was because Ashok became a Buddhist that he had all those wonderful principles of governance, welfare state, care of people, care of animals, care of vegetation. That is why he had those inscribed over there. But these are all part of Indic philosophy.
Yeah.
Which of the Indic religions does not believe in this? And I have a very interesting idea for an article. I'm going to take all the inscriptions of Ashok and point to all the shloks of the Arthashastra where exactly the same things are written. So that it is no doubt in anybody's mind.
No, and because when he was sort of, quote unquote, to use their terminology, when he was sort of a tyrant, right, in his earlier sort of avatar, or the alleged Kalinga thing or something. I say alleged is because a lot of historians debate of whether it happened in Kalinga or whether it happened somewhere else. And that's why it's very important to read the books, right, and not watch movies with Shah Rukh Khan as historical.
Or the television serials. Are they the number of people who write to me, no, you're wrong, the television serial said this, and you are not saying that in your web series. Yeah. I just don't know where to begin to tell them that television serials are not, in any way authenticated by anyone.
No, and the show might be fantastic just by itself. Like, I truly enjoy watching Chanakya as pure entertainment value and for a historical context. But you cannot take that as the sort of...
Except, for one honorable exception, Adit. Chandra Prakash Dwivedi's Chanakya is perhaps the most wonderfully researched.
That is exactly what I was coming to. Chandra Prakash Dwivedi's Chanakya. I was like, please tell me that Chanakya is researched well, because I think it's researched pretty well.
It's amazingly researched, detailed. It even has quotes from the sources close to Alexander, from the lost Megasthenes Indica. There are certain other people like Strabo, etc., who have quoted from him. So there are quotes from those.
And has one of the best opening tracks by one of my favorite Gujarati composers, Ashit Desai. We are familiar with his work in Gujarati. He was assisting Pandit Ravi Shankar in the Asian Games and stuff. But if you just see the Yastoma Sadagama, it's absolutely rousing.
Fabulous. And even today, it's fabulous no matter how many times you hear it.
Yeah, I mean,
that's very honorable exception.
Right.
The kind of serials that come after.
Sorry?
There have been some new serials last year or year before last. I get a lot of references from viewers. That TV series said this, that, and the other. I'm afraid I don't watch such.
See, unfortunately, I have almost stopped watching serials on TV channels. I watch a lot of streaming shows because the streaming shows gives them the liberty. Like, there was a streaming show called Bandish Bandits on Amazon Prime, which was, and I have
yet. Is it?
I think it's pretty good. I mean, I have a lot of questions with what they show and stuff, but not bad questions. But one thing I have to say, if there was a show to be made on Indian classical music, I could not have chosen it for it to be made another way, because the singing and the music is outstanding. And
wonderful. I look forward to it now.
So they have Javed Ali, Pandit Aday Chakraborty, and Shankar Mahadevan being the three voices of classical music who are classically trained. And they are outstanding. And there is modern music also, and they have sort of used it in such a beautiful way. And if you even have problems with the content or something, I don't think there are a lot of problems with the content. It's very watchable, but the music is so outstanding. So
good. I put it on my watch list now.
My point is, this would have never been made on Indian TV channels, because they would have tried to show some sort of a cliffhanger and stuff. Here, the riyaz, the amount of time they spent on riyaz is so much, because that's what the. But
you know what, Adit? I should not be harking back to the past, but there is a short series by Padma Subramanian on Bharatanatyam. I think that is also unparalleled. It is available on YouTube, and anybody who is interested in the Natya Shastra, in classical dance of all forms across India, should watch that 14-15 part series. It is outstanding. It's made in a very academic and not very viewer friendly way, and it's very old, but it's very good. So anybody interested in classical music and dance.
So हम लोग usually end of the podcast में तो recommendations कर रहे हैं. Sumedha and I are already giving you podcast recommendations बीच में. So it's good. We are off to a good start. Because all good historians, authors, readers, right? So I always say this, and you can see the amount of books that occupy Sumeda's wall. Unfortunately, I can't show you my wall, but I have the same way. Because I love to read, right? And I was just talking to my wife that I probably need to get another shelf and put it up, because now my books have gone from horizontal to vertical. कहाँ जहाँ जहाँ जगह आ रही है वहाँ मैं book डाल रहा हूँ.
Hope your wife is tolerant of books and she loves books herself, because otherwise, it becomes an issue where to keep books in the house.
हाँ वही. So no, we have come to a very nice conclusion: the guest bedroom. So at least whenever our guests come, they have space to stay, right? But they'll also be occupied by scholarly work, and my wife doesn't have to see them every day. So,
That's a good idea. Mine is a basement library, so I have a lot of space, and there's a lot of space.
No, but that's my ultimate goal, that eventually when we move to another house or something, get my own sort of secret library or something where I can just retire to. My wife is very scared of that. She's like, you'll stay there and never come out.
Never emerge.
Because I can read most books. Even like you would, I can read. I love history, but then I'll also take a lot of time in reading Harry Potter. I absolutely love it. So, but अभी actually मैं जो पढ़ रहा हूँ, it's a very interesting book right now. So I am revisiting sort of a few books on Indian history, contemporary Indian history. So I did a podcast that people might have heard with Vaibhav Purandare, where we were discussing the biography of Veer Savarkar, right? So I'm reading about contemporary history, and that sort of brings me to the point about contemporary historians. That right now we are seeing a lot of discussions, revisiting of historical figures by many people who are not historian. And let's face it, not everyone who writes a book needs to be a historian, right? It could be just an observation of a particular personality and what they take of it. But all in India, for various years, it had been like there were a few historians from a very cozy cabal who controlled the narrative, and only they wanted to say what happened in the Gupta Empire, in the Mauryan Empire, and also what happened with Nehru. And I don't understand, how can one person be an authority on all of it?
Yeah, so save history from the historians, as you said in the beginning.
Right.
Adit, we suffered from the colonial yoke. So we started off with colonial, imperialist kind of history. Mm-hmm. We had some nationalist historians. The Marxists came up and said, we are the ones who oppose imperialism. So then they opposed imperialism. Then a little group from them broke off. They called themselves the subalterns. They opposed the Marxists. The feminists also opposed the Marxists. And you see that India is a nice little, what can I say, bowl of soup in which they have been making their own concoctions. Oh. After 1947, we all know that Indian history was handed over to some people to become the absolute Bap Dada of it. They decided what went where and what didn't go where. Now, that would not have been a problem if these people had stuck to proper historiography, evidence-based history. Then it's okay. The same people do it, right. But they look at evidence, they look at history. Unfortunately, they put ideology instead of evidence. Right. And that is my grouse with them. So, because if you want to research, we have to base ourselves on evidence. And for my part, I cannot emphasize this enough. Absolutely. We have some means of evidence, some sources of evidence, for example, archaeology, text, numismatics, inscriptions, etc. We must base ourselves on evidence.
So it's interesting. So Sumedha actually talks about Nehruvian historians. Unfortunately, we don't mince words on my podcast. But the reason I'm talking about it is I have some sort of agreements with Indira Gandhi on her foreign policy, certainly not on an emergency. But one thing where I have a huge grouse with the Indira Gandhi administration is the history books and the patronage given to the communist historians. And even if you're a fan of Indira, which I am not in all proportions, I have a lot of disagreements and some agreements with her.
But I do admire her in a corner of my mind somewhere.
No, so that everyone does, because what happened in 1971, unlike the Congress, we never say that Kargil war was their war in 1971.
Because all our country.
Yeah. what she told to Henry Kissinger, what she did with Raw, with Ramnath Kao, everything is there. I have talked about that for 250 episodes, guys. So if you want to troll me for this, go ahead, troll me. But at least listen to my past work or read it. But, and I suppose we don't have to contextualize that we support her on that to oppose her on history. Because if you see Romila Thapar, Bipin Chandras, all of them were patronized from the late 60s to the late 80s. And of course, it went on. But this was the crucial time, when they were sort of a lot younger than what they were. They were writing more books. And this was the time when Indira Gandhi was the prime minister after 1966, except for 2 years when Morarji Desai. And I mean, you really cannot even tell the Janata government to do history because they were too busy saving their own government from falling. From 1977 to 1980. Yeah, so it's like telling HD Devegowda and IK Gujral, what did you do about Indian history? They're like, hey, हम लोग तो मतलब contemporary में ही घुसे हुए थे, history में कहाँ जाए? So that is
the way it was wholesale handed over to them, and nobody could say anything at all. So Adit, even in the 2000s, I started thinking about this book in the mid 2000s.
No, but Sumedha, before you get into that, I have to ask you one question. Because it was handed over to the communists, do you think that the idea, the interpretation of even people like Mao or China or contemporary Chinese sort of communist philosophy was very nicely done because this was done to card-carrying communists?
Of course, not just China. Look at Russia, where I grew up in the 90s, and the kind of Russian propaganda, books, etc., that we were exposed to in some of these industrial townships, the ones which were done with the help of Russia, all those townships which came up with the help of Russia. Then I was in DU, and you used to have vans selling all these Marxist and leftist books, and you could get them for 50 paisa or 1 rupee or whatever.
Something about Lenin, right? Lenin was shown as this sort of great revolutionary. It's only after I read really about what Lenin did, and I'm like, oh my.
I must say this over here, that I have studied in Delhi University, and there were people who used to swear by Lenin and Marx, having read not one word of it. So I used to buy those books and read them, and when I would ask them a question on it, they were obviously like, they had no answer. So this was just, in the end, it just became a self-fulfilling kind of bubble. People used to not know anything.
मुझे तो ऐसा लगता है कि if Marx listens to them, even he will not be a Marxist anymore.
Yeah, he will not understand or recognize what they say. But the Marxists have unfortunately done a huge disservice to social sciences in general, not just history, but to social sciences in general. In the area of sociology and anthropology, we have that big elephant in the room called caste. The study of caste through leftist Marxist lens, through colonial lens, has done an incredible disservice to us. And it is only now that I see some people trying to push away a lot of misconceptions and trying to understand it the Indic way, the Shastrik way. We must, Adit, bring back our own epistemological methods and terminology again. We must.
Absolutely. And that's epistemological methods and terminology is the key, because terminology is what it is, right? If we still call our murtis as idols, and I am guilty of doing that. I'm guilty of doing that myself in my previous sort of, till I was not told that, by what the hell are you doing, right?
Yes.
So even something like very simple, like in Jainism, right? The gods, sort of the people you pray to, are called Tirthankars. We don't call them even gods. There is no even, when you go to temples now, people will say Bhagwan, but you don't even actually say Bhagwan. You actually used to say Tirthankar, because it was it was a perfect soul that you are praying to. They were not some sort of this miraculous, came and give you boons or something.
So, this translation of words from our own indigenous languages to English has been a disaster. And in the end, we then learn to understand in the English way.
No,
and we forget whether.
And I don't understand. If yoga can be an English word now, why can't murti be an English word?
Yes,
why do we have to say identity? Yeah. So,
and when I write, I use a lot of Sanskrit words, and I do not apologize about it. Let me assure you that when I write my fiction books, then we do 13, 14, 20 rounds of editing because of this. But I still do not apologize. I will not use translations. I will use Sanskrit words where it is not possible to put some. If I say skirt instead of antariyar,
Hmm.
if I say shawl instead of uttariyar, does that mean anything? No, it doesn't.
Or using a different word for Angavastram. What are you going to use?
What are you exactly? How do you translate Angavastram? I wish somebody would tell me. It's all
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Because so there is a Gujarati word we use so we wear that for when we go to the puja for Jains, and it is ang something only, but it's like the vastram is Gujarati, Hindi, they're all derived from Sanskrit, so it is easier to find words in that. But I really don't know how to translate that into English, like a lot.
Shoulder shawl.
No,
I don't know.
yeah, but someone actually used the same translation for lungi, which is like a loin cloth, and I'm like, no, Angavastram is not a loin cloth.
Oh my God, no, this is actually cringeworthy.
I'm telling you, people have used such translations.
No.
And,
So I am sure we are making the point very clearly. No translations, please. Of important concepts and terms, no translations, please.
no, and my thing is, when we are in the Western civilization, I mean, in US in 2012, 16, or I forget the year, but basically there was a year where Barack Obama went to Alaska, and the highest peak was named after an American, basically a white person, and that was changed to its Native American name called Mount Denali, and the park was called Denali National Park. It's been 4 years, and I can tell you, I've been here for about 13 years, and I forget the name what it was called before Denali. Now everyone calls it Denali, right? So so when people tell me this nonsense that why rename things, why rename things from what they were 50 years ago? Because there was a conscious attempt to rename the identity of that thing, and when you
erase all older identities and to substitute the invaders and the colonials' identity with all that, and it's worked to a very large extent, especially with the literate class. With the illiterate class, it hasn't worked that well, thankfully. They still call. Yeah.
And let's not, I mean, I will not pretend certainly that I'm very innocent in this. मैंने 500 बार मुंबई को बॉम्बे कहा है, because Bombay was renamed in 1995, and that is literally what I grew up listening to, Bombay. And abhi bhi main jaun, when I go to Mumbai, I was there for a week this year. I mean, one of my favoriteest places to go. Everyone I talk to, I've known them for 25, 30 years, they all say Bombay. So it's, abhi bhi sandwich ko Bombay sandwich hi log bolte, no one calls it Mumbai sandwich, right? So there are certain things which will take time to change or something, but I do realize where the sentiment comes from. So I will not deride what someone stands for. But it's very easy now. Almost no one I know calls Chennai as Madras. Everyone calls it Chennai. Right.
And the danger with this is that often, we have a lot of Mughal names for a lot of places. So then what people think is that there was no history before the Mughals. The number of people who I've met who think that history in India started with the Mughals, not just outside India, but also inside India, is legion.
I was in an Independence Day event in Houston about 7-8 years ago, 9 years ago, I forget. And I was doing something else, but I heard they started a history of India, and they actually started with Akbar, and I literally wanted to go and punch a wall. And I'm like,
yes.
I was like, so when you talk about Patna and Pataliputra, Patna's original name, there is still a place Pataliputra. For all our election nerds, there is a constituency called Pataliputra where Lalu Prasad
Yadav's colony called Pataliputra. I belong to that colony. I've lived in that colony and grown up in that Pataliputra colony.
Exactly.
On the bank of the Ganges.
Exactly. And there is a constituency where Misa Bharti used to stand against Ram Kripal Yadav. Ram Kripal Yadav won the election from BJP last time. But I'm telling you, so these names of these places do exist. So Pataliputra existed before even Akbar's grandfather did. Right?
Pataliputra existed at the time of Gautam Buddha.
No, that's what I'm saying. No, even before. So I'm saying that how can you start about a history of India and start with that?
But this is not some kind of mistake. This is done with intention. It is done with the intention of wiping out past history. So this is not an innocent mistake.
But that's what I'm telling you. So it is done with an intention by the historians. But then when you have contemporary Indians, and I would say Indian Americans here, who have not grown up listening to this, reading about this, and when they look up on Wikipedia and stuff, and guys, don't scoff ki acha ye karte, because you and I might not do that, but 99% of the world, that's where they get their
And Wikipedia is a hotbed of misinformation about Indian history. Whenever I open it, I have tears roll down my eyes.
I'm saying that,
I'm actually talking about it.
yeah, but we'll have to reach out to these people who we cannot just deride them, call, "Arey, aapko ye bhi pata nahi?" No, we'll have to reach out to them and say that, boss, this is what you should read. This is what you should
Make
follow.
information available, accessible, interesting, so that they can actually access correct information in an enjoyable way.
Exactly.
So then they're going to learn it.
Right. And that is the key, how sort of they do that and how they come up with, this sort of perspective. But let's talk a little bit back about the Maurya Empire. What facets of Chandragupta Maurya, Chanakya drew you to these series? Like, what can you tell our viewers, listeners, apart from what they don't know already?
Okay. So, we know that Chandragupta Maurya established this empire. We even know how he did it with the help of Chanakya. We know all these things, but do we know about the real nuts and bolts working? What was the administration really like? What kind of food did they eat? What kind of houses did they live in? What kind of gods, goddesses did they pray to? What festivals did they have? What was their theory of medicine? What kind of science existed during that time? So these are the kind of facets I want to concentrate on. And there is indeed evidence that one can look at and talk about all these different aspects of the Mauryans. Why are they so interesting? Because at least 2300 years ago, they were a behemoth empire. And they managed to run that behemoth empire through administration. They managed to run that whole thing. They had enough money. So, often it is said that the army was huge. The trade that they fostered was huge. And the agricultural innovation that they did was superb. So, it was on trade, army, agriculture, surplus that this whole empire grew up. So, also, the economic innovations, currency innovations, tax innovations, and importantly, and not a small thing, international relations. This is my favorite part about the Mauryan Empire. The kind of international relations they had with the kingdoms around them, and the kind of theory that Chanakya posits, and the way it was practiced by the kingdom itself. So all these things are fascinating, and you will see glimpses of modern India in so many of these.
Because let's talk, 90% of the Indians know about the Chanakya, or maybe not 90, but 70% of the Indians know about the Chanakya story, that they went to, pre the Dhanananda times, or how he was insulted, and how Chandragupta Maurya threw out the Greek invaders. And then they know that Chandragupta Maurya, along with Bhadrabahu Swami, died as a Jain monk in Shravanbelagavi, right? Between the part where he became the emperor and when he died, and I think he died at the age of 42, if I'm not mistaken, right?
No, it was about 50. He ruled. He ascended the throne at about 25, what evidence says, and he ruled for 25 years. And then he went off, and then he attained samadhi with Bhadrabahu.
He did Salekhana, which is what was debated. Again, another concept that was debated a lot in the last few years. And
I don't know what made him do this. Why did he renounce everything and go off?
No,
because for 12 years, there was a huge drought in the kingdom of the Mauryans. And
the famine.
The drought, he had been fighting with the drought, and I think in the end, perhaps he gave up. The misery around him was too much. He couldn't fight with it any longer, so he left. It is said that he was influenced by that.
Yeah, maybe. And actually, so Jain scriptures also talk about this great famine that happened, and as a result of which a lot of Jain monks had to go up north, even north of Nepal, and some Jain monks had to go down south. And that is where sort of the splits, even in the Jain Samaj, sort of happened about, the interpretations, books and stuff like that. And it's fascinating. I think I'll tell you a very interesting thing. The big murti of Shravanbelagavi, it's Bahubali Swami, right? It is actually not a Tirthankar. It is the second son of the first Tirthankar of Jainism, Lord Rishabdev. So his story is so unbelievable. And according to Jain epistemology and Jain scriptures and stuff, the word Bharat actually comes because he was the first son of Rishabdev, right? But that brings me to another question. The term Bharat is so important to Hindu scriptures, Jain scriptures, and whatnot, and it's just unbelievable how what that name, how much important. So when they talk about the idea of India or there being not a concept of Bharat or something, there are 3 or 4 different sets of scriptures, religions that actually talk about this. So how can you be ignorant about this?
No, it's not ignorance, Adit. This is, I think this is malice. This is malice with intent. This is
Exactly.
something that is done to, cut you off at the roots. What was India? Nothing. It was just a few settlements scattered around the railway tracks made about the British. Haven't you heard this? There was nothing called India. Just a few settlements scattered around the railway tracks that the British made. So all these have, Bharat is there in each and every tradition of the subcontinent.
Correct.
You told me about the Jain tradition of Bharat. We have a Sanatan Dharma tradition of Bharat. So it has always been there. Although the Mauryans themselves also had another name for their kingdom. They used to consciously use the name Jambudvip. It appears in one of the minor inscriptions of Ashok. So they themselves used to call this land Jambudvip. The ideas of
so do Jains, by the way.
See,
the term Jambudvip, the term Jambudvip and Bharatakshetra, it's called Bharatakshetra. So
Bharatkhand. So Sanatan call it Bharatkhand.
Bharatkhand and Bharatakshetra. So that's what we were saying. One sort of terminology interpreted differently.
Yes, exactly. That's
true. So when we go to
I must add over here that there is a dream that I have about the study of history in India, that it starts becoming more and more evidence based and it uses modern technology. So we have to go back many thousands of years. Current methods of studying history cannot deal with this because there is no other living civilization extant like ours, which goes back to so many thousands of years ago. So, there are no methods. Normally, they do post-mortem of a dead body, but we are not a dead body. We still live. So how do you study a living body? A dead body you can cut up and you can have lots of methods. Can you do the same to a living body? No.
So you've actually come to a point because, and we've already come to sort of the concluding part of the discussion. We are 45 minutes and we usually try to limit this for an hour. But actually this is a great point, and that's what we want to dissect. We are going to dissect this living body called India in the series we do on the history of India. So if the first was on the Mauryans, we're going to move forward, talk about some other aspects of the Mauryans and then relate it to the contemporary India. So guys, if you like this, I'm sure you did, please write to us. If you didn't like it, let us know what you didn't like and we'll address even that, right? But before we sort of conclude,
talk about it next time.
But before we conclude about this, like I said, we do recommendations, Sumedha. So what are your recommendations to our listeners and any other concluding points you want to give to our listeners?
My recommendation is definitely the series on Bharat's Natya Shastra, which you can find on YouTube. It was shown by Doordarshan a long time ago. It is done by Donsu's Padma Subramaniam, and it is absolutely beautiful. And my last point and my only point all the time is, please study history, please research, please base yourself on evidence. And also, please do not think that because we have thrown out the communists and leftists from political power and we want to throw them out from academia, we will substitute some kind of our own ideology. No, I am not in favor of that. I am only in favor of one thing: evidence and research. And modern methods, modern technological methods of dating, of imaging, of geophysics, of genetics, use all these please as much as possible. Absolutely. And I did want to say a little bit about the general sweep of history, but maybe next time. Because there are some
go on. No, we'll spend a couple of minutes talking about it.
When we look at the sweep of Indian history, something really strikes us about the past. About the Vedic Indians, we have a lot of textual evidence. Nothing as far as physical evidence goes. About the Saraswati Sindhu Indians, we have a lot of physical evidence and nothing textual because we haven't yet deciphered the script. So can it be possible that once we decipher the script, then the text and the physical remains will come together? Can it be that we will find that which we are looking for, physical evidence of the Vedic period? Is it that we will find in the Saraswati Sindhu civilization? So we are kind of moving towards that. And why are we moving towards it? Because we are using now modern methods of analysis of the data and evidence that is there for the Harappan period, for the Saraswati Sindhu civilization, whether it be genetics, whether it be geophysics, whether it be imaging, or whether it be dating. We are trying to use all these methods, and therefore we are able to close one of the biggest mysteries and biggest gaps in Indian history.
Fantastic point, Sumedha. And I don't think I can conclude with a sort of better thing. My recommendation also would be to watch Moryanok. Do watch it. Do read books. Do read Sumedha's work. Do read any other history books. Sanjeev Sanyal has written some fantastic books about the land of seven rivers and stuff. And
I cannot recommend normally any history book because I find all of them have too many big issues. But I always end up recommending Sanjeev Sanyal because his Land of the Seven Rivers is an excellent way of approaching Indian history.
Outstanding. And then certainly watch the series Chanakya by Chandra Prakash Vivedi. But thank you so much for joining us, Sumedha. This was absolutely fantastic. We hope to do many more of these very soon.
Thank you everyone.
For all of you
listeners. Thank you, Adit, for calling me here, and I look forward to more freewheeling discussions like this.
Acha, haan, aise to hai. Now we won't have to wait for 2 years on this.
I hope not.
No, absolutely
not. Aditya, and namaste to everyone.
Namaste, everyone.